The next topic is Laserfiche Audit Trail, and we're going to go through a configuration of the system, take a look at how you generate reports, and do some minor configuration settings on the Audit Trail program itself. Laserfiche Audit Trail is typically installed on the server initially, but can be accessed through a browser to a URL, and that is typically the server name /audit trail. If you're on the server, you can launch Audit Trail from the program menu, go into Audit Trail. Usually it's been pre-configured by our support staff or somebody there at the client. Let's take a look at some of the configurations that you might want to change in the future. Some of the basics are in here, but most of them are just kind of set and forget. This doesn't normally come up. It only comes up on my machine, so ignore that little pop-up. But you get into the Audit Trail configuration module that way. And administrators usually do this. This is not something that you typically need to know how to do. But here's as we see, the Audit Trail configuration out of the box, pre-configured. So our support team has done this with the client, and we've connected to a repository, and it is auditing that repository. And it has a welcome tab with all the kind of overview settings that tells us what's going on. Then the other tabs here, the repositories tab will allow you to connect to the particular repository. We might need to add a link to another repository in which you can make the connection settings for that repository, both the server name, the repository name, and a username and password that you would use to connect with, usually the admin account. Once that's all set up, and if you want to take a look, it's already preset, you can use Windows authentication if that account is valid in that domain. You can also use Secure Socket Layers, SSL, to encrypt the connection between the Audit Trail configuration and the repository. If that's all set, the database settings, these are usually very specific, and they connect to the Microsoft SQL database that is being used to generate the reports. There's two components to Audit Trail. There's the logs, and there's this Audit Trail database. The logs are where everything is. The database keeps the information only relevant to what you've set in date ranges. So the audit logs are sitting on the Laserfiche server. The date range that you set here pushes this range of information into that database. And since we have a range here of 180 days, or let's say even it's just 30 days, that's kind of a rolling 30 days, right? The next day forward, one day is going to be dropped off, and therefore it is that previous day gets dropped off from the database, which is technically where all the reporting comes from. So if you have your setting here, you should be okay. If you need to audit a point in time 2 years ago on the month of February, you can add additional data. And you just come into this Date Ranges tab, click on the Add Data button, and say, you know what, I need to go look at a month in a particular year and audit whatever happened in the system based on that. Now, before I go too much further, we also need to make sure that we have permissions configured for the users. And that would allow, on a Windows domain, we would configure additional users to use Audit Trail. Because out of the box, nobody really can get to it from anywhere but the server. So typically, if you've got, like on our network, we would log in with our username and password. Well, we would be able to typically add that account from the domain and find your name, Jason, or your name, Jennifer, or your name, Chris, in that list, and add your names to the list of people who can access the Audit Trail reporting module. And that's what's done here under permissions. And finally, let's do, let's see, which using groups. Okay, so once you've set all these settings up, typically you don't have to kind of come back and set it too often. And if that's the case, then you can click over here on Run a Report, which is the same as if you had come in to the program files, if you're on the server that is, and launch the Audit Trail main page, which, if we do that, goes to the server name /Audit Trail. And if you're on a network and you have permissions, you can do it from your own workstation, and you would get automatically logged in. In fact, you see here there's an automatic login, and your username is up here. So the Audit Trail has a licensing scheme that allows you to sell Audit Trail with 3 different modes. And I can send you the list, but basically Audit Trail has 3 levels. They call it Starter, they call it Standard, and they call it Advanced. And I'll show you the difference here. If we take a look at that's not it. We'll take a look at the training guide here. Starter, Standard, and Advanced, if you can see that. And we'll scroll down a little bit. And Standard versus Advanced, there's a big difference. Starter is very basic. In fact, Starter Edition only allows you to audit the events for everyone, not specific users, right? So you have to audit everyone's events, and it only audits certain actions, documents sent to the recycle bin, etc. So all these in this first column, that's all that you can audit with Starter Edition. So when you're selling this and you're talking to a financial advisory firm, this is not going to be the solution. Starter wouldn't even be close to what they need. Standard might be enough if it meets their compliance regulations, because you can track user-specific actions, any unsuccessful attempts, removing users from groups, granting of Windows account rights, and all the items that come with Starter. However, it doesn't tell you anything that you might find if you had Advanced, which includes anybody who comes into the admin console and makes changes to access rights on their account in that admin console, as well as changes to rights on folders in the repository itself. So you can't, without Advanced, you can't prove that nothing changed, right? There's no way to say, well, I know nothing changed. I mean, an auditor, from the SEC may say, prove it. And you really can't without Advanced Audit Trail. So if a advisory firm, wealth management firm, whatever, has a compliance regulation that says I need to be able to prove that nothing changed or something did change, and that's why we lost data or something, Advanced is going to be your Audit Trail module of choice. So hopefully that makes sense. Let me know if you have any questions on that, but we'll switch back to auditing. Okay. All right, so out of the box, Audit Trail comes with 3 reports, one called deletions, one called failed logons, and one called page creation. They are useful to view because they kind of tell you exactly what's going on and how they came about building this report. So if you double click on it, it'll launch. And it's a very basic report. It's an entry-based report, so anything in the repository that was an entry, folders, documents, shortcuts. And if you scroll down from the checkboxes of the event types within that, the event subtypes, all it is looking for is a delete entry activity. So this one is pretty darn basic, and at this point, it's from today until 180 days ago, and there you go. That's the report, and there it is. It should show us what we need. We can hit refresh, and there has been no deletions, at least that it was tracking, in this system. So when you're building a report, it's very simple. If we go ahead and collapse this down, we look at our event types, and you can choose this. and what we're looking at here is if you had the advanced edition of Audit Trail. As you could tell by those checkboxes, some of these checkboxes might not even be valid because they're not available due to your licensing method. Many of them are already in there, but you can track some of these. So any one of these items have sub-items, and you can filter on them. So let's say you wanted to choose everything, just click on the box for every piece of metadata that's been updated. And maybe you want to do an entry, and let's expand that, and maybe not everything in entry, but I want to see when an entry was checked in. And I want to see if they were checked out and what the metadata is. Once I've done that, go click refresh. And we see that on some of these dates here, they are aside from check-in and check-out, we're looking at metadata creation and anything else. So we're getting a ton of information. Why don't we just limit it to not metadata, but just to check-in and check-out events. And we'll go ahead and hit refresh. And there were no. I did one yesterday, so I'm not sure why it's not auditing that. Then again, the audit service might have been off. Sometimes the audit module, the service, can be turned off due to restarts on the server, and that's kind of important for the IT staff to know about. There's an audit trail reporting service that's always running that will cause problems if it's not running. But auditing typically is, running on the server side. So that's kind of weird. Let's do this. Let's do a assign template on the entry event. There we go. So we have a, come on. And my system, obviously there's something going on here, but it's taking a while to render that. On most systems, it is fairly quick. Not sure why we're getting that. I can't do any right clicks in here. Actually, 0. So I'm not sure why it's showing me something even though there is 0 events. Well, that's interesting. Let's go back and let's add a filter. So let's select everything for entries. Now we can click on adding a filter. All right, so the filter pops up, and you can choose from the various columns, as we see here. And this allows us to filter on any kind of column that might be available regarding one of these types of events. And maybe we want to see who logged in. And I want to include a trustee, and we'll type in the trustee of admin. And guess what? Oh, there we go. The admin account is there. Just this thing's taking a while. Click OK. And click OK. And it should show up as an event filter down here as well. Now, just to point something out, the audit trail reporting may or may not be working like you expect. And initially, upon setup, what one typically does is goes into the administration console of that repository and needs to make sure that the users are being audited. So they'll go to the either users, or if you have starter audit trail, you would go to the everyone supergroup here, open up the account, and go to the auditing tab and make sure that the proper settings were applied. All right, so if that's set, great for starter audit trail. If you want to be more granular and say, okay, I don't want to use everyone, I would leave everything unchecked on that, and then I want to be, because I have standard or advanced, I just want to audit events that are occurring with this user. We've got all these being tracked. So you can say, hey, are you a group? You know, and I'm going to audit them because you're a member of the everyone group, or do you want to specifically audit things? So you can be very granular as to how you audit all users or some users. It's all done here once you have Audit Trail installed. If Audit Trail is not installed, this auditing tab is not visible. All right, but it looks like audit was set and has been tracked. So theoretically, we shouldn't have any problems here, but we're not getting any results, which is, for some reason, kind of odd. And it's my system. Typically, we'd see a set of lists. Let's go ahead and choose metadata and do a refresh, because I know that one was certainly giving us some results. Oh, but I set a filter, didn't I? You know what? Let's close that out and start from scratch. So let's go. Okay, we're getting back into the system. Let's go take a look at page creation. Okay, so here is some information as far as some events that occurred in the repository. And we have our columns, and we could, filter further on, or you can do filtering in another method. Instead of clicking Add Filter, we can use a slightly different method, and we can right-click on any one of these columns. And when I right-click on the column, I should be able to sort by that particular application name that's in the column using one of these Boolean operators. So I can do is like, is unlike, is or is not this exact setting. So let's say I wanted to search for only client activities. I can say, hey, this is going to be my search criteria. It is only the client, and it'll refilter based on client-based activities only. And if that's what I like, great. I can also go in, and there should be another icon. And as you can see, they don't show in my system, but typically there's icons here. And we can select the columns to display. So you can see application name, login name. Those are all listed here. And if they're not something you need, maybe you don't care if the succeeded column is there, go ahead and remove it. If you need to see one of these columns closer to the left-hand frame, you can say, well, you know what, I need to see the entry ID as the first item. Click OK. And it should refresh those columns. So now the entry ID appears somewhere in there. So there you go. Fun and games that sometimes don't work in my system, but typically would work in most end users' systems. So you can do things like download this as a result set into a CSV file, or you can print this get it in a printable view in a browser, at which point you can print it to a printer if you so desired. Most of my clients love the download option. They get it as a CSV, then they can do further manipulations on the columns. Hey, there's the entry ID in the first column. Well, there you go. They actually started working, even though it doesn't display here. So always fun. My system, not the greatest, but most end users perform as expected, as we see here. So going through all the event types, we're not going to do that today. It is fairly straightforward, and the only thing to typically do is maybe come up with your own searches. You can use this to generate the productivity of users. Let's say they're scanning documents and you want to see by user how many pages were created in a certain time frame. You could use Audit Trail to run a report that says, well, I know that on this week so-and-so had this many pages scanned, so-and-so had this many pages scanned, and so-and-so's the winner because they scanned more pages than anybody else. The uses are varied. You could have that kind of reporting, or you could have, I guess, forensic reporting, if you want to call it that, when something goes wrong, Why is a document not in the repository where I expect it? Is it even in the repository? Did somebody delete it? Those kind of reports can be run within Audit Trail. A lot of times we as consultants will use Audit Trail if they have it with a consultant, with a client, and use it to figure out why workflows are not working because we can't track it somewhere in workflow, or it, whatever reason we suspect, well, workflow didn't change it, maybe somebody else did. And therefore, Audit Trail will be very useful as a detective, so to speak, and allow us to figure out what's really going on in the system, as long as everything's pre-configured. All right, so that does it for Audit Trail. Any questions? Oh, you know what, before I go on, you can change your displays from grid to chart. Some displays lend themselves to a certain, I don't know, style better than others. So not all reports would be chartable. I think a page, create page by, I don't know, do I need page numbers? Okay, maybe. And if we take a look at that, it shows us a bar graph. And there you go. So this, I think, are, I'm not sure what the columns are, but these are the page numbers for applications. Oh, okay. Let's do this. Let's do by entry ID. That'll be interesting. We should get a whole bunch of columns. There we go. Not a very useful report, but as you can see, for those, we can see how many pages came in for each of those. So not the greatest in, you know, what you want, but if it lends itself to that, great. So some are better in grid than chart, just to be aware of that. And we go over that in our training as well. And if that's all you wanted to do, great. Time zones usually are set for the end users, and there you go. We're back to the new one. You can create new reports, and as we see, just check your boxes, set your filters, and then when you're done, you can hit the Save button and save it as a particular report. And if you want to share it to other users, you can by clicking the Share box, which, in other words, when you saw the initial Audit Trail page with those 3 items, you might have now, with a new report, a 4th one, and it would be visible to users if you checked the Share this report, so other users could see it. Otherwise, they won't see it. It'll be just for you.
Okay.
All right. So there you go. As far as Audit Trail goes, there's not much more to it, but I think that covers most everything. And if you need more information, let me know. Your virtual machines, your demo machines should have Audit Trail. So if you want to take a look at each one of what we can kind of sort by. So within the event types, there are all the different sub-event types within each one. So it's really pretty good within the system. I've never heard any complaints as to, well, gosh, this doesn't let me report on something that we definitely need. It's pretty darn inclusive. Mm-hmm. All right, so we'll conclude Audit Trail training here right now.